Hello and welcome to this Edexcel GCSE Geography Walking Talking mock based around cities fieldwork questions for paper 3, designed to help improve your confidence in reading and answering the exam questions. As always, what we need to do is read the instructions of how to use this video correctly to make the best use of your time here. So if you need to, pause it so you know what to do. Now, before we go on to look at the questions, just a quick recap on our cities fieldwork, where obviously we went into Birmingham. The fieldwork questions will be based around 2 of the 6 main areas, and the main areas are as follows. So it was designing questions and the fieldwork process, how we were going to collect the data. And ours was, how was the CBD different to the inner city? There were a range of different data collection techniques that we can use, and you need to know the meaning and the good points and bad points of each of these. So primary, secondary, qualitative, quantitative, random, stratified, systematic. If you don't know those, you need to go back and revise them. We also need to look at what we did to process and present the data, the different types of presentation that we used, our description and explaining of the results of them. What did we find and why do we think we find that? And then what were the conclusions and summaries? Overall, how did the CBD differ to the inner city? What were the main things that we found as we did it? And then finally, it's evaluating all of the above sections. So what went well, what were the good things about what you did, what were the problems, how could you improve it, and how could it impact on the reliability and the validity of your conclusions. So are your conclusions reliable? If you were to do it again, would you get the same results? And are they valid? Do they make sense? Do they fit the theory? So looking at the questions, for section B, you only have to answer one of the 2 questions, either question 3 on central and inner urban areas or 4 rural landscapes. But we did the central inner urban area, so we would do question 3. So mark an X in this box so it gets picked up by the computer when they're scanned in. So you have carried out fieldwork when investigating urban environments. Name your urban fieldwork location. So where did we do it? In our case, this was obviously Birmingham. Now, it says here, explain one way in which the secondary data you collected supported your urban geographical investigation. So explain. You've got to give reasons using connectives such as this means that, this leads to, this is because. So just one way. So we've got to look at how did the secondary data, not the data that we collected when we were in Birmingham, but the data that we maybe collected from internet sites, websites, or other data. And how did we use that to draw our conclusions for our investigation to see the changes there? Now, the first thing you need to do is name the data collection method chosen. And it's worth 3 marks in all. So what different information did we use? Well, it might have been information on air quality. It could have been information on levels of deprivation, of levels of education. It could have been ethnic minorities. And so for that, we would have used census data. So you need to think about how we used that information to support our changes in the city. So 3 marks, 3 minutes, have a go now. Look at the mark scheme then. Now we can see here that the mark scheme is talking about GOAD maps, which are a type of map which plot individual buildings and what they were used for, but we don't use those in ours. But what we did use was Office of National Statistics, the census data. So here they're talking about housing tenure and how we could make an overall judgment about the place, how it linked to different other types of data. So we could do the same on the environmental quality of the different areas and the type of land use or the types of shops or the types of people that lived there in terms of their education, work, etc. Okay, but it's about this idea of stating what it is, why you collected it, and how it helped you out to get those 3 marks, and you can see the point marks there. The next question is, explain one way the physical features of the urban area you studied influenced the land use of the inner city or central urban area. So explain again. It's another one of using those connectives, of giving your point, giving reasons, and then extending it because it's worth 3 marks. So use those connectives because this means that, so this leads to. Give just one way, that physical features. So think about the physical features. These are the natural features. These could be things like slopes. They could be things like rivers. Could be woodlands and things, but probably less in an inner city or central urban area. So think about when you went to Birmingham, what were some of the physical features? Were there hills? Were there slopes? Were there river or water features? And how might they have influenced the land use, the way that the buildings or the types of buildings that were in the inner city or central urban area? So 3 marks, 3 minutes, have a go now. So looking at the mark scheme, there were many different things you could have said. For example, part of Birmingham, the city centre, was built on a steep slope, but this meant that the buildings had been designed to actually cope with this. So it hadn't affected the land use that much. It was still very built up there. But you can see here, I mean, they've suggested where the land was steepest, that's the physical feature, what impact it had, and then what it meant on those areas. So here we've got town centre limited by its closeness to the floodplain. That's the physical feature, which led to this, which meant this. So we can see we've got those extensions and those connectives for our answer. So explain one disadvantage of the sampling strategy you used when investigating views of people on the quality of the urban environment. So we've got, again, another explain question. Using those connectives, it's only one thing that you've got to explain, but this is worth 4 marks. So you've got to talk about, or really extend your answer to talk about the problems that were there. You've got to name the actual sampling strategy and probably talk about why you chose that strategy, what was the view on it, and then actually talk about how you collected the views of different people. So that would be important. And then you need to extend that to say what were some of the disadvantages of it. Okay, so this is quite a difficult one, so think about it. Explain one problem of the different sampling strategy. What sampling strategy did you use? Random, systematic, or stratified? And what technique did you use? So were these interviews? Were these questionnaires? Were these just getting people to comment on a tick sheet? That kind of thing. So have a go at that now. So this question was really about you understanding the advantages or disadvantages in particular of different sampling techniques when carrying out interviews or when studying sampling people. So you can see here, a disadvantage of random sampling is possible unintentional bias because you might be drawn to different groups. So there's one connective, which another connective could cause you to oversample them and therefore affect the reliability. If you notice at the end of this, it's always about leading to affecting the reliability of your results. So you've got basic problem of that sampling technique, and you've got an impact on the reliability, and then you've got the reasons for that. Okay, so that's the way that this gets marked by point marking there. So have a look at your answer. How could you improve your answer? Now you've seen the mark scheme here. Now move on to the 8-mark question. And it's really important. You can see there's a lot of information here before you even start to write your answer. And you must read every bit of information that's there. Figure 3 shows the results from a student survey investigating shop types with distance from the CBD in Shrewsbury. The aim of the students' investigation was to consider changes in land use in a central urban area or CBD. The students surveyed land use along 6 roads out from the CBD and had 7 categories of land use to find out their variation within the town. So here they're talking about, here is the question that they've been, or aim they've been working towards, and this is the technique that they used. Here we talk about the findings. So they found that retail was the dominant land use category. They found that industry was only found in a couple of sites. There was more open space as we moved away from the CBD, and basically overall, as you move away from the CBD, land use changes, but overall land use remains varied along the transect. So there's a wide range of different land uses in all areas, although it does change. Now it also says study figure 3 in the resource booklet. So if we look at figure 3, here we can see, and we'll just zoom out a little bit, that we have this cumulative percentage charts to show. Between 0 and 250 metres away from the CBD, we can see that we've got a small amount of residential, largely retail, small amount of professional and commercial, small amount of public buildings, some recreation and leisure, and some open space. So we can see quite clearly how this changes as we go through. Now, the question is, evaluate the students' methods and findings. So here we've got talking about the methods. What did the student actually do? And here are the findings. So what we need to do is have a look at detail at this question. So when we evaluate, we need to look at the good and bad points, possibly in the improvements of the things that they did. The methods looked at how they collected the data. So look at the graph, look at the information on there, and it says that they categorized or put them into 7 different classes of land use in 250 meter sections. They chose 6 different roads out of Shrewsbury to collect this information on. The results, now these were the findings or the conclusions what they made, and what you need to do is compare what the student says on the question paper with the results that you can see in the presentation of figure 3. Now if we look at those, what we can see, so they chose 6 different roads, but we don't know how they chose these different roads, so there could be some bias in there. Also, there were only 7 categories, and some land use might not fit into these. As these were grouped, the transects were grouped every 250 metres, there could be many variations within 250 metres. The first 150 metres could be one type of land use, and then the next 100 metres could be very varied. So we don't see, because those distances are quite large. Also, we don't know whether they just chose main roads to do this on, because if they did, then the land use may have been very different between or behind these roads. Often on main roads you get far more retail with residential behind them. So there's no way of seeing that from the data. The results, well, the student says that retail is dominant, but the graph shows that there is far more residential and open space throughout the whole of the transect. Retail is only really dominant in the first 0 to 250 metres. Now you can see here it's important that you give evidence from the resources as well to back up your answers. And you could talk about, you could talk about open space and how that varied along the transect, but they've said it gets more as you move out of the city. So using all of the resources, giving quotes from them, make sure you write in paragraphs, give a brief introduction, clear paragraphs with a couple of lines in between each one, so you can go back and add information if you want to. So 8 marks, 8 minutes, evaluate the findings, off you go now. You can see the mark scheme has done as we did prior to the question, in that it's looked at how the findings in the graph compare to the findings that the student wrote about. So you can pause it here to have a look and compare to see if you've got any of that information. And then finally, remembering that these are level marked, not point marked. So you've got to show a wide range of different ideas. You've talked about both methods and the findings. You've looked at some of the differences and some of the problems in them, and you've given a conclusion overall. So I hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching. See you again soon. Many thanks. Bye.